All right, we're going to get things started. Welcome everybody to our presentation today about about the importance of pollinator pathways. We are joined today by Jim Sirch and Mary Ellen Lemay. Let me just give you some brief instructions. Everyone is muted now, and you will be muted throughout the presentations. However, you can submit questions through the chat that we will address after the presentations. To do that, just mouse over the Zoom presentation and you'll see a dialog box that has a chat next to it, and you click on that. That will pull up your chat, and then just type your question into there and hit submit. And then also, we may, if we have enough time left over, open it up at the end for verbal questions as well, if we have enough time left over. So without further ado, let me, oops, my Zoom just closed here. Okay, so let me just give you a brief background about Save the Sound. We are we lead environmental action in your region. We fight climate change, save endangered lands, protect the Sound and its rivers, and work with nature to restore ecosystems. And what makes us unique among regional nonprofits is the breadth of our toolkit and results. We work in many ways, from legislative, advocacy, and legal actions to engineering, environmental, monitoring, and hands-on volunteer efforts. And together we restore and protect all that impacts the Long Island Sound region's environment, from its rivers and shorelines to wetlands and forests, and from the air we breathe to the waters of the Sound itself. For more than 40 years, we've been ensuring people and wildlife can enjoy the healthy, clean, and thriving environment they deserve today and for generations to come. And it's donors like you that make programs like this possible. So please consider supporting our efforts at savethesound.org/donate. So today we're here to explore the importance of pollinator pathways. And with over 100 towns in Connecticut and New York in various stages of launching pollinator pathways, this landowner outreach strategy has taken the region by storm in only 2 years. By planting natives, avoiding pesticides, and reducing lawn, this very scalable initiative has the potential to create healthy, connected habitats for pollinators and wildlife as they move across the landscape. The pollinator pathway has all the ingredients to help landowners restore biodiversity with simple action steps, which we will get into through these presentations. Today, we're joined by Jim Sirch and Mary Ellen Lemay. Jim is the education coordinator at the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History and has served as past president of the Hamden Land Conservation Trust and is currently serving on their board. He's a certified Connecticut master gardener, and Jim gives talks throughout the state on gardening for pollinators and growing native plants from seed. Jim was featured in the members Making a Difference section of the summer 2016 issue of the American Horticultural Society's American Gardener magazine. He holds a BS in forestry for nature interpretation from West Virginia University, a BS in biological science education from Miami University, and an MS in environmental studies from Antioch University in New England. Mary Ellen, or Mel as she is sometimes called, is the landowner engagement director of the Aspetuck Land Trust, Westport, Fairfield, Weston, Easton, Connecticut, and pollinator pathway facilitator for the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership, and also a member of the Connecticut Native Plants Working Group. She has a BS in biology from Fairfield University, an MBA from Fordham University, and a master's in environmental management from Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. She's a former Trumbull Land Trust president and currently the chair of the Trumbull Conservation Commission. She's a Connecticut Deep certified master wildlife conservationist and on the board of the Merritt Parkway Conservancy. And she's also the vice chair of the Metro COG Conservation Technical Advisory Committee. So we got some heavy hitters here today to answer all your questions. We're going to begin with a short presentation by Jim about how to create a pollinator pathway, followed by another brief presentation about the Pollinator Pathway program and how to enroll one in your community by Mel. So please hold your questions until after the presentation or submit them through the chat as I indicated, and we will go through them at the end. And again, if there's time, After we've addressed all the questions in the chat, we'll open it up for other questions. And without further ado, take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Martin. Well, it's great to be with you all today and also to share this program with Mary Ellen, or Mel. So, all right. Well, yeah, I'm going to be talking today about how to really add biodiversity to your yard or open space in your area. So we all know that we have habitat loss occurring through time. It's easy to see for all of us. And as we increase in time, Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts are expected to become more and more urban, as you can see with projected forest loss, the blue areas here below. So the idea is actually to, with this situation is to, what can we do in this type of neighborhood to increase habitat for pollinators and other wildlife? We have, we are a nation of lawns, and or a turf nation, and that is a biological desert. There's not much wildlife in this type of habitat, if you want to call it that. So Connecticut and New York, well, not as much New York, I'd say, if you're considering the whole state, but in Massachusetts, but we have the dubious distinction of having a lot of lawn in our land area. So that has consequences for a lot of wildlife. Butterflies, through time, there's been a loss in species. And also neotropical migrants, many of the birds that travel to other places, our migratory songbirds are declining as well. This is not a good habitat for this wood thrush. Can't get much food in a blacktop area. And that brings up the point right now to think about what you can do in your space to actually, instead of, using the leaf blowers or your rake and raking up all the leaves and putting them to the curb, you actually can save them as a really great mulch for your garden beds. But this is the place where wood thrushes are hunting for food during their migration, and as well as places that moths and butterflies are overwintering, as well as other life. And I really like this poster by the Sirch Society that leaves are not litter. So leave the leaves. And we also have an issue with invasives, as we all know. We're battling those in our open spaces. And here's the big six in our area. There's a lot more that we have to deal with. But that's an issue when these plants come and take the place of our native plants and don't provide the necessary food and resources for birds, bees, and butterflies. And speaking of bees, much of what we eat actually is, requires pollination. So I like that, 1 in 3 bites is the result of insect pollination. And about a third of our bumblebee species are in decline. So it has the effects that it really affect us. It affects our health. And recently, the rusty-patched bumblebee has been put on the federal endangered species list. And it was something that was in Connecticut, in New York, Massachusetts, in the last number of years, quite a common bumblebee, but now it hasn't been seen for a while. And as well as other bees are declining. You've heard about, some of the articles about this insect apocalypse. Well, that's due for a variety of reasons. We're increasingly, of course, the monocultures of our lawn, even our crops, are an issue. But really, also a really big issue is what we're putting in our lawns and farms and agriculture. And our homeowners use more pesticides than all of agriculture. And there is a one that's really been tied to a lot of insect loss, and it's a group of insecticides called neonics or neonicotinoids that are systemic. They get within the plant and they actually can transfer into pollen and nectar. And so that's causing some real issues. So we want to have spaces with a variety of native plants wherever possible. Some plants do attract, that aren't native, do attract species, and that's fine. This is Vernonia or ironweed, sorry. And you can probably see, what's it, 3 fritillary, great speckled fritillary butterflies on it. And also when you're thinking about increasing for pollinators, think about having plants in grouping the same kind, about 3 feet or so of the same species of plant. That really can help because insects actually home in on color that way. So the other thing is that many bees are and other and butterflies and are specialists. So we have to really, I always say plant for the specialists, right? Because the generalists, the ones that feed on all sorts of plants will be okay. But if you put in specific plants that'll attract those that really only come to certain plants, that can really help. For example, this top photo is of golden Alexanders, Zizia, and it provides pollen for one kind of bee. That's pretty incredible. So that bee is only coming to that plant to get pollen. And that other plant you just saw, New York ironweed, provides pollen for another species. So these are 4 plants listed here that have specialist bees that come out at a certain time of year, probably timed when they're flowering to get the pollen and nectar. So you don't want to create, I mean, this looks certainly great in an estate or a castle, but the same kind of plant formally planted is not really good habitat. Certainly a lot of bees will come to hyacinths, but not really to attract a variety of things. You want to have things in bloom, 3 of a kind at any one time through the season, besides having a lot of the same kind. So think about your open spaces as a variety of different plants with different layering, shrubs and trees, native shrubs and trees that do provide not only nectar and pollen, like we mentioned, but also leaves that insects feed on. This is a new way of thinking about gardening, is you want insects to eat your leaves. You want moths and butterflies to eat your leaves. And there will be plenty, if you don't use pesticides, there'll be plenty of other things to eat them. So that's a good thing. So a variety of different plants in a space, natives wherever possible, is a good thing. So here's that idea again of layering, having trees and shrubs and also the understory. It's nice to do that within your yard. So also native meadows are possible. So you may want to think about a certain section of letting things go to come in. Here you see a lot of goldenrods, which are top pollinator plants, one of the best. There's a bee biologist, Heather Holmes, said if somebody asked a question, if you could plant anything, what would it be? And she said goldenrods and asters. So that would be something to think about. You notice on the left side, there's a brush pile. So instead of putting all your brush to the side of the curb, save a little bit to put in a section that creates a really great place for overwintering bees, bumblebees, and other wildlife. And bumblebees actually, the queen bee actually comes and she'll go underneath logs like this to spend the winter and then start a new colony in the spring. So logs, leaving logs around are a good thing as well. Another thing to think about that you can do is that last year's stems, about 30% of our native bees are actually tunnel nesters, and they will use dead stems like these. So if you leave like about 2 feet up or so, and then just let those stay, and next season you're when your green plants all start to grow, the new green growth grows, you can actually, you'll have bees actually nesting with that. These are small native bees. Most of them really don't sting. Here, an example of one that uses plant stems is the mason bee. And this is an interesting bee box made with invasive Phragmites stems. So here's a use for a bad invasive we could use to increase, if you do put them in a little tube like this, that's always a good thing as well. So yeah, and this is the mason bee itself. 70% are tunnel nesting bees as well. So leaving a little bit of open space, sand is always a good thing. Why native plants? And we talked about caterpillars. Here's a native oak tree, 450 species of caterpillars feeding on in Connecticut and our local areas, probably New York as well, it's about the same. And 4 species on a non-native ginkgo. So we want caterpillars because we want the birds. We want the chickadees to come in and get the that's what they're feeding their young on primarily during the summertime. So our native oaks are probably one of the best trees you could actually plant in your yard for a lot of different caterpillars. Think about during the spring as well. Native willows, pussy willows are great. A lot of native bees and butterflies come to those. So you want to have plants throughout the year at different times of the year that you're growing, as well as berries. This is a good time. Our dogwoods are now, our native flowering dogwood has berries that a lot of migratory birds are depending on as they're during the migration. So highbush blueberry, another great native plant. It really is has great fall color and attracts these butterflies. And anise hyssop, another one. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. I will have a whole list. Mary Ellen and I put together a nice resource list for you. So our milkweeds, of course, are very important for our monarch butterflies, and we want to increase butterfly populations. Here's common milkweed, great plant. Swamp milkweed, another one. Butterfly weed. These are all native Connecticut and New York plants. So really good to have. So we want to increase populations of monarch butterflies. And there's a lot of different life that also depend on those. We mentioned goldenrods. Here's a great native goldenrod called blue-stemmed or wreath goldenrod, Solidagosasia. It can be in dry shade. Can't beat that. So just a couple examples of our members of the aster family, New England aster and Joe Pye weed. Attract a variety of butterflies. So yeah, don't forget about our native shrubs. Maple leaf viburnum gets nice flowers, berries in the fall, and nice fall color. And it's the host plant of the spring azure butterfly. So these are, it's a specialist. So, all right, here's the butterfly right there. Okay, spicebush is a native plant, native shrub that provides really great berries as well. And it also has nice fall color, and it's the specialist plant for the spicebush swallowtail. Here's the caterpillar, and there is that was the adult right there. So the same can be said for eastern red cedar. Its berry-like cones will attract cedar waxwings. Also, it's a host plant for the juniper hairstreak. The members of the carrot family attract black swallowtail butterflies, as well as this. It'd be kind of funny to think about gardening for flies, but it's really important. Syrphid flies actually feed on scales and thrips and lots of pests in our garden. So, and they're really attracted to members of the carrot family. So think about that as well. There are a variety of native grasses, little blue stem, and that'll attract butterflies and bees. And our violets will attract, they're the host plant for the great spangled fritillary butterfly. Think about water in your yard as well. In open spaces, that's really key, important. This is like a puddling station for butterflies. You can add a little bit of compost and compost manure, and they'll come in for the salts. So here is just a quick list. We're just finishing up here. And, create water, reduce the amount of your lawn. There are easy ways to do that. And really think about using natives, eliminate your invasives, and support environmental organizations like Save the Sound. I always say eat more deer. That's my little joke, but deer are a big problem, as we know. So it's a hard one to deal with. There is some research, by the way. I just want to quickly mention that that you should raise, if you were to rear monarch butterflies and the caterpillars, that there's some research showing that it's best to do that outside. When they're raised inside, they actually don't migrate properly. So I got this at IKEA, this little laundry basket. It makes a great place to put in plants you can rear monarchs on. And I do grow, as Martin mentioned, I do grow a lot of wildflowers from seed, and using milk jugs is a way to do that. And we have that in the resources. So put your seed out in the fall. Many need to stratify, and that's a good way to do it. So this is a resource that I really highly recommend, is by the Connecticut Butterfly Association. It's life histories. If you go to ctbutterfly.org, it has every plant that they feed on, the caterpillars of all the species found here. It's really great. Mel has this on the Pollinator Pathway site, and that's in our resource list. I saw that from her. It's really great. It's What to Plant When, native plants. A couple of books here I highly recommend as we're finishing. Doug Ptolemy, there's a couple of books by him, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope just came out. Really great resource. Two sites I recommend going to if you want to know what to plant, what plants in your area. You can enter in your zip code. One is National Audubon's Plants for Birds. Just key on those words, or National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Finder. It'll just bring up the plants that you'd require to do that. Thanks. And I'll stop share.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Mary Ellen, would you pull your slides up?
Sure, certainly. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Does that work?
Yep. Take it away, Mel.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jim and Martin and the folks at Save the Sound and Connecticut Fund for the Environment, inviting us to this to share some great experiences that we've had with rolling out the Pollinator Pathway. And as Jim talked about ways to attract pollinators, I'm going to talk about ways to attract humans to get together and create these pollinator pathways. So just a quick snapshot of what a pollinator pathway is. It's actually a corridor of public and private properties that provide native plants and nutrition for pollinators. So the big green circles there, you could consider as open spaces or parks. And to have not only pollinators, but birds and other wildlife move across the landscape, we need to connect those spaces easily. And this is what the view looks like when they're connected. And that's our goal. In order to do that, in those places are our backyards. So just as Jim showed the aerial view of what our neighborhoods look like, unless we can transform how we treat our neighborhoods and how we treat our backyards, we won't be able to create these corridors across the landscape. So what let's see, why is that not going? Okay. There we go. Okay. So getting people to become partners with the Pollinator Pathway and put their backyards on the pathway helps to close up the gaps for movement across the landscape. And we can do this through towns working in our municipalities and especially private property owners. And the way you get on the Pollinator Pathway is creating pesticide-free, healthy yards for pollinators. And if it's healthy enough for them, it's healthy enough for our families and our pets as well. So this is the concept. This illustration, I always thought, clearly gave you a picture of how to correct the fragmented habitats that we're seeing all over the Northeast. And again, the two large squares are with the trees on them. Those are our open spaces, maybe our land trust properties. And the wildlife and the pollinators just can't get across that that big gap. It's like trying to cross a highway. And until we look at our backyards as stepping stones, we won't be able to increase the flow of pollinators and wildlife across the landscape. So we can reconnect this landscape by making our properties stepping stones across a healthy native landscape. And this aerial view from a group in the Midwest called Monarch Gardens gives you a snapshot of what a house would look like if it were a healthy stepping stone. If I were flying over here as a pollinator or a bird, I would certainly stop at this property because it has native grasses, native shrubs, and it looks like it's connected to what was an old tree farm in the back. Meanwhile, the neighbors on both sides are just lawn, and that doesn't attract anything that's flying over. So let's think about how we can create these stepping stones, and that's the information that Jim had shared with us. So the story of this Connecticut Pollinator Pathway started in around 2016. We had a regional conservation partnership called Hudson and Housatonic, which still exists today. A conservation partnership is made up of land trusts. It's made up of conservation commissions from town to town. And typically those groups never spoke to each other before. So these conservation partnerships were created. And a project that we came up with in 2016 was a way to do landowner outreach. And Donna Merrill, who is the Wilton, the town of Wilton conservation chair, who's in the blue shirt there, came up with this idea of Pollinator Pathway by getting people to start planting native dogwood trees in their backyards in Wilton. And she worked in a couple of small lake communities. And it really took off because the narrative was not only about planting meadows, but how important our native trees are to pollinators. So at the same time that H2H, we were working on that, our friend Dr. Kim Stoner at the Connecticut Ag Station was working with a team and writing the Pollinator Protection Law. Connecticut's one of the first and only handful of states that actually has a pollinator protection law. And part of the law was, number one, restricting neonicotinoids, which is what Jim mentioned. And the other thing was mandating our Department of Transportation to actually restore and plant our DOT properties using native grasses and native plugs and shrubs. So it was kind of the perfect storm in 2016 to bring all this good information out to the public. And that's when we launched this Pollinator Pathway. We had a lecture in Wilton. Dr. Stoner came and talked about the law. And then within the past 3 years, it has just taken off. We are beyond Connecticut now. We're into Westchester County, into New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. We have people in the Midwest and the South who are calling for these pollinator pathway signs because they want to get on the pollinator pathway. So it's just been, I've been in conservation for over 20 years, and I have never seen anything take people's imagination by storm as this pollinator pathway has. And I think there's a couple of reasons why it has actually worked so well. One of the main reasons is that the pollinator pathway is a scalable model. So no matter where you live, no matter how big the property is, you can become a pollinator pathway property. So, way down the bottom, we see people who may live in a condo or have a small garden. They can put their pollinator plants in pots. And then you get up to the next step where you've got homeowners who maybe have a little 5x5 garden in front of their house. They can be on the pollinator pathway. And then from there, you go up to larger properties in municipalities, maybe outside of the library or the town hall. And then the larger scale land trusts, nature centers, big restorations. Those are the big properties on the pollinator pathway, and it includes all of these. So with the planning, the complexity and the cost increases as the size or the scale increases. So that was one reason that we thought this had worked so well over the past few years. And the second reason was we kept a very, very simple message. We figured people could remember 3 things, not 4, not 5, not 10, but 3 things that we would just continue to preach over and over. One is rethink your lawn. That could mean anything. Reduce the size of your lawn, mow less, mow every other week, use organic lawn care practices, and doing something like, hopefully I have a picture of adding clover in islands in the middle of your lawn. It looks beautiful. And that's how you can rethink your lawn. The second is plant native plants. Pollinator Pathway follows the gospel according to Doug Tallamy, and everything he says just resonates with us. So we kind of have become his goodwill ambassadors out in the field, encouraging the use of native plants, which increases the biological diversity of your land. And number 3, of course, avoid pesticides. Pesticides and herbicides negatively impact the health of all of us. And E.O. Wilson has had a quote that the world without insects is a world without people. And that is absolutely true. They are the bottom of the Jenga game. You begin to pull out those wooden pieces at the bottom of the Jenga game, the whole thing falls down. That's where our insects are. So we need to make our landscapes friendlier and more attractive for the insects. So over the past couple of years, we found that there's a process that seems to work very well to start a pollinator pathway in your town. And what I'm going to do just in my few minutes here is go over each one of these 6 steps of what has worked beautifully in launching pollinator pathways in the town. First is convene your team. So kind of take a step back, a 36,000 foot look at your town. And what nurseries are there? Are there nature centers? How many garden clubs do you have? Master gardeners are usually in those garden clubs. Watershed associations for the Pequannock River or the Norwalk River. And get your town conservation commissions or advisory boards involved. This is the team. So you basically send out a message or do a presentation and say, we want to get together a group of people to launch a pollinator pathway in our town. And the first thing that we're going to do is plan our route. And this is Louise Washer and I at Highstead planning the kind of original pollinator pathway that went from Wilton to Ridgefield. And it's kind of fun for people to look at maps of our towns. We don't often get the opportunity to do that. And it allows us to see where our green spaces are. And the right here is Trumbull. And you can see there's kind of, our pollinator pathway really should incorporate the neighborhoods adjacent to all of the protected open spaces here. So this is the Pequannock River Valley. And so that kind of gives you an idea of what this looks like from the air, what your town looks like for the air. And let's start connecting these open spaces with the neighborhoods. Number 3, hold a kickoff event. On the left is a photograph of the very first 2017 February of 2017 launch of the pollinator pathway in Wilton, which was the very first pollinator pathway. Kim Stoner spoke at that event. And from there, everything just took off because in that audience were people from surrounding towns in Connecticut, surrounding towns across the border over into Westchester County. And that was kind of the catalyst. That was ground zero for launching the pollinator pathway. And then on the right, we had a launch. This is the town of Darien. They opened one of their nurseries at night. This is a nursery that is on Post Road in Darien, who has become a completely organic nursery. And they threw a wine and cheese party to launch their pollinator pathway. And we had lectures and a good opportunity for people in the town to gather with each other. Number 4, engage community members, corporate participants, town stakeholders, and staff. We've got Boy Scouts in our towns. Some of us may have corporate headquarters in our towns that can provide us with a source of some really strong millennials to help us dig holes. And you know, a lot of larger companies have sustainability departments that are looking for something to do in their local communities. So let's get them on board as community members and stakeholders to roll out the pollinator pathway in your individual towns. And spread the word. This we found has just been so important to get information out on social media, to do a lecture in the library. We've had some articles in Edible Nutmeg and the Connecticut Magazine on the pollinator pathway. And down the bottom, we developed a blueprint that will allow people to take this brochure and make it their own. So the content of the blueprint is on our pollinator-pathway website, which is the next slide. But it allows you to bring the flavor of your town and photographs from your town and add it to your own brochure. And that's typically between that and buying plants. Those are the only real costs to launching a pollinator pathway. And the way to raise money many times is by selling the signs. So number 6 is staying connected. This is our website, pollinator-pathway.org. And I encourage everybody to take a look at it. It's a beautiful website. It is managed by Jana Honig, who is one person. She's our webmaster. She works at the Woodcock Nature Preserve. And she's taking all this input from towns. And each town that's on the pollinator pathway has its own page. And you pull down the menu, and there will be let's say the Hamden pollinator pathway or the Trumbull pollinator pathway, and it lists all the events for the town. So each town doesn't have to have its own website. It's one website. We have yard signs that are available to order. They are small little 5-inch round metal signs that can go on your mailbox saying this property is on the pollinator pathway, and all of the resources that you need to launch a pollinator pathway in your town are on this website. So handouts, PDFs that you can print out, best practices for removing invasives, gardens, meadows, tips for planting containers, where to buy natives, alternatives to pesticides. And so this has been a few years now of really curating as much great information as we can without overloading people. So this is kind of like your clearinghouse for the pollinator pathway. So there's our sign. That's the mailbox sign on the right. And as people sign up and commit, my timer, commit to the pollinator pathway, they can get their name on the map of the town, and then you can begin to chart across the town where people are on this pathway. And just as I wrap up here, a very interesting project that has emerged from the pollinator pathway and the native plant working group is an ecotype project. We found as we were opening up pollinator pathways from town to town, we didn't have enough native plants to provide to people. So, we'd have to go to Massachusetts or Pennsylvania to purchase native plants. So the ecotype project was launched out of Connecticut, NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, in conjunction with some local farms. And it's a great concept. It's just beginning to take off in Connecticut. Botanists go out and collect native wild seeds, not the plants, just the seeds, at certified locations where people have not used pesticides and herbicides. And then we have organic farmers on the left, like that's the hickories in Ridgefield. They grow seed crops, and those are that's Joe Pyeweed. So you just have one large pioneer plot where you can, founders plots, that is what we're calling them now, which is the seed source. Send the seeds to local propagators. We are using Planter's Choice in Newtown. He propagates the native plants into flats of 32, and then we sell them. Our plant sales. Our Aspetuck Land Trust had 2 plant sales this year, and we've put probably close to 10,000 plugs of natives out into the landscape. And then pollinators and the birds thrive. So this is all of us, the whole ecotype team at Gilberti's in Easton. So this is a new project that's really been very exciting for us. And we're taking these plants and seeds, and we get an intern, Paige Lyons, who also designed the sign, the Pollinator Pathway sign. She's a landscape architect master's student, and so she's developing these beautiful planting plans for us of where to put how many of these plants based on how big they are, based on their need for sun, and it just helps people. And we've been selling these native garden design ecotypes in flats of 32. So the whole thing is ready to go. You just buy the flat 32 and all the plants are there, and we tell you how to put them in. So it's been a lot of exciting things. This is a pollinator corridor research project that we're just starting at Aspetuck Land Trust, one of our nature preserves. It's actually 6 habitats in a kind of walking through a successional landscape, if you will. We're going to have a formal courtyard garden, all natives, all ecotype plants, a meadow, which we're seeding this November, a bee lawn, which we'll put in the spring, an ecotone transition, which is kind of an edge habitat, and then a wetland. And so this is, we're working with a group in Massachusetts called Landscape Interactions that designs pollinator habitat using local ecotype plants. And then again, this is a bigger partnership where we're growing and bringing in landscape designers, Connecticut Audubon, lawn companies like Mow Green. And so it's just been a great opportunity to see this whole process grow. And this was last September in Connecticut Magazine. We had an article, the 4 of us that were kind of like the team that started the Pollinator Pathway. So just to close, the secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but building the new. And this is really, I think, why the Pollinator Pathway has been so exciting, because we've let every town do their own thing. And people go out into their backyards and they see all of this beautiful nature showing up. All of these photos were taken in somebody's backyard in New York, just a residential small property, and she had all this stuff in her backyard. So so that's all that I have for my part of the presentation.
Okay, great. That's some great information from both of you for sure. We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm just going to run through some of the questions that have come through chat. One is from Krista McNamara, excuse me, where she asked if you could address the use of pesticides in areas that may be near a pollinator pathway and how that may affect it.
Okay. Jim, do you want to take that? Or you want me to?
Sure. Well, a real issue is probably some towns are using it in right of ways and along town edges. So it would take some, politicking, I think, to deal with that. But yeah, there is an issue with, in some pesticides that the spray can, travel through wind and so forth and get into it. And so, as well as the neonics that we talked about, both of us have talked about already, that cause an issue. It's a real issue for them. So I don't know exactly, I don't have an answer for what to do about that as far as, but I would just say, building public awareness and, attending town council meetings would be the way to probably address something like that.
Yeah, I would agree. That's usually the most direct path, is just to be in tune with what's going on in your neighborhood and what your either village or town, attend some of those meetings about what's going on with their with the municipal application of pesticides and different things like that. We have another question from William Cans Jr. He's asking, is autumn olive, even though considered invasive, good for pollinators? Theirs attracts birds.
So I don't know if Mary Ellen, I don't want to take all the questions, but
No, this is a good one.
Yeah, it is. So it's interesting that there are invasives that provide seed or fruits and seeds for birds, and think of also buddleia. It's not native, but actually can seed in and cause problems in some regions, some areas. So, but autumn olive is an invasive, so it is spread by birds. The problem with some invasives is that it's almost like eating potato chips. They're high in carbohydrates, but not really that high in fats and lipids and some of the other nutrients that birds need, particularly on migration and so forth. So yeah, it does supply some food, but it actually, olive can spread and then take over the space where other native plants are.
Here's another plant question for you, just since we're on plants. So Megan Bastuka, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She would love to plant Zizia aurea, but she's heard it is often eaten by rabbits, and she has a big problem with them eating her plants. Is your experience, do rabbits often feed on this plant?
So I have it and I planted, and I do have rabbits. Yeah, a big rabbit. But what you can do actually is rabbits don't like mint. And a way to discourage them is to plant mint. Now, mint will spread, and a way to keep that from happening is put it in a pot and sink the pot in the ground, and that'll keep the rhizomes from spreading. But you'll just have to, once it goes after flowering, because mint are so some of our mints will attract a lot of bees as well. But once it goes to flowering, then make sure you cut it so it doesn't go to seed if you don't want it to spread around too much. There are some sprays that are kind of natural sprays. You might look into that as well, but I would say try something like mint first.
All right. So Mel, this might be a question for you. Jay Burney, who's with the Pollinator Conservation Association, based in the international Niagara region around Niagara Falls. He's asking, we're creating pollinator pathways along the Niagara River Greenway and its watersheds, and he's looking for a model pollinator corridor or ordinance. And is there a link to or any information that you can give to a Connecticut Pollinator Protection Law?
Yeah, so actually the first of all, the Pollinator Protection Law is available. You can go on the Connecticut DEP website. I think we actually have a copy of it on our pollinator-pathway.org site. But for ordinances, for town ordinances, it's funny that you bring this up, because this is a project that's emerging now. What we found, some towns do some really innovative things, like they'll have a proclamation that their mayor or their first selectman will write that, X town, Fairfield, is on the Pollinator Pathway, and then they get a lot of press for it. But the next step is kind of taking the wording from that document and turning it into an ordinance. And we have those also on the website. So they're kind of model ordinances for towns to do proclamations, or a town ordinance. This town doesn't support the use of pesticides now, or this town encourages the use of native plants in all of our parks, or something like that. So we do have some of these samples on our website. There's I don't know about New York, but in Connecticut, unfortunately, we have these preemption laws, which will prevent towns from making stricter ordinances or laws than the state has. So Connecticut is restricted neonicotinoids. Towns want the chlorpyrifos to be restricted, and we can't do that now in our state. Maine can. So every town in Maine can have their own pesticide ordinances. So it's just something to be aware of, what your state regulations are for preemption, giving each town the opportunity to write their own laws.
That's great. Diane Saunders actually asked if there's a group working on this in Fairfield. Do you know, Mel?
Oh, Fairfield, yes. Fairfield, yep. There's Mary Hogue, Hogue. She is the queen bee in Fairfield that's running the pollinator pathway there. So I would encourage you to reach out, go to the website again, pull down Fairfield's information, and you should be able to see when they're having their next event. I mean, things have been really quiet, obviously, since COVID took over, but a lot of places are still having plant sales. Aspetuck Land Trust, we're still having social distancing plant sales. So there's activities out there I'm sure you can find in Fairfield.
That's great. This actually ties into a question that I wanted to ask and that we talked about in some of our pre-meetings about this. Robin Parsons basically asked, she's I'm interested in incorporating public spaces into a new pollinator pathway. These public spaces have been colonized to a great extent by invasive species, and the municipality has little money or interest in fostering native plantings, except if she can demonstrate cost savings. Most of your planting plans seem to be best suited for residential gardens, but she's wondering if you have any examples of municipal space plant groupings, shrubs, perennials, etc., that have been successful in more formal settings. And also, I'd like to add on to that, how do we get municipalities and maybe state authorities to use roadside land and maybe those center strips to be more pollinator pathway friendly?
So I'll start from the end and go forward. There's a link to a PDF that you should have in the resource page at the end of this Zoom, and it's the Maine Department of Transportation has worked with a team at the Wild Seed Project and developed this roadside booklet that's just incredible, and it lists all the native plants that can be used, should be used, how to maintain them, when to mow, when not to mow, what plants can manage the salt, the road salt. So that is an excellent guideline, is the Maine DOT roadside planting book. And for municipalities and public lands, we do have examples of quite a few towns that have worked with municipalities doing fundraising for public lands and large scale. Typically, you have to kind of get your parks superintendent or your public works involved, so that you can manage the invasive. The invasive removal many times is the hardest part. But there are some larger projects we've done at Aspetuck Land Trust. We've got a 2,000 square foot garden at Earth Place in Westport. And right now that project that we're working on at one of our other preserves is 20,000 square feet. And so we're going down that road towards larger plantings. So some of those are, if you look on the Pollinator Pathway website or the Aspetuck Land Trust website, we have some of the garden plans there.
Okay,
And I would just add that, I'd also add that once you, for towns or homeowners, once you remove invasives, of course, it's just really important to kind of immediately plant, replace that with natives, or, as you go.
Okay, we're just about out of time here, but we have two other quick questions, so if we can quickly get through them. Actually three. Joanna Smith asks, do you find it easier to establish a pathway working with a government agency like DEP or sustainability offices, or is it best to just make it happen on a citizen level?
Our experience has been the towns that have really done this well start with at the citizen level. Garden clubs have been major drivers in a lot of the towns that have been successful. And from there, you get maybe your town conservation commission or someone else to bridge that gap to the town itself, and then begin bringing on some of the other partners and stakeholders in the town. But I've seen the towns that add their own flavor and start small. And this has just taken off. When we go and do a presentation in a town and launch, we rarely hear from that town again. They just take it and run with it. they know the players, they know the flavor of the town, they know how to do it in their own town. So it's kind of, if you've seen one town, you've seen one town, because they all do this differently. But I would say start small and then spread from there. And you get, like with anything, is usually 3 to 5 people that do all the work to start. And then it spreads
Right.
from
Yeah. It's good to be the starter of the action as
there.
well. We may go a few minutes over just to answer these last 2 questions. So Sarah Newman asks, can you tell us how far away the pesticide use needs to be to protect the pathway? And it may be difficult to go entirely pesticide free in a surrounding area.
Well, I guess, Jim can answer probably information on like the foraging areas of a lot of bees. A lot of our bees have, anywhere from 10 feet foraging areas to 100 feet to 1,000 feet. So each species has a different foraging area. But it's a real problem. And, we have a couple of organic farms. The one in Ridgefield that's developing they're growing our ecotype plants. It's an organic certified farm, and it has neighbors around it that are using pesticides. And it's terribly frustrating. And education is one thing, but as Jim said, this tends to have to be at a policy level, in the town, just to create setbacks. And in some states you can, in the DEP for Connecticut, you can sign up to get a notification if somebody's going to be spraying pesticides, but that just tells you what to do. Where do I cover my plants when they come in? So it's definitely probably one of our biggest challenges right now is the pesticides, and the where the drift goes. So Jim, I don't know if you have any other pointers for distance.
No, you said it. It does vary by the species of native bees and so forth, but it is, it's within, sometimes can be a relatively small area, but some do travel. And yeah, I guess education and trying to educate as many people as possible toward, the issues around pesticides are key.
Well, I'm picking up on that is our last question from Bill Wiseman, which he lives in a co-op and wants to use chemical weed killers to get rid of weeds and lawns and shrubs. And what natural methods can be used as an alternative to harmful weed killers?
So one I can chime in here and say is plastic, and can be put down to burn out. During the warmer months of the year is one way. Actually, even wood chips, would be a pretty simple way to do it too. To increase, another thing is to increase your lawn. If you have even some, invasives that are herbaceous, is to actually to cover over with wet cardboard and then put in mulch, and as well as composted, manure and that kind of thing, and compost, and then plant into it the next year. Some invasives are real, they can be like Japanese knotweed is an example of one that really needs a lot of work. You have to pull, and sometimes 2 or 3 years if you're not using any chemicals with it to get rid of it.
Okay, great. So we're a little over time, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to give a closing message. If there's any last tips or something that you want to tell people that they can do right now in the fall to get ready for next year, Jim or Mel, whichever wants to jump in.
Well, I would say just to start, well, I mentioned about the decreasing your lawn with putting in, the wet cardboard and then mulch on the top of it and plant into a really easy way to do that for next year. But I'd say the biggest thing is that don't get overwhelmed. Start small, just a little bit at a time would be my recommendation.
Yeah, just a little 3 by 3 foot section will do miracles for
Yeah,
just to start out. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, as Jim said earlier, leave the leaves. This is going to take just some habit changes by people, but leave the leaves in the garden. They're so important, or rake them into the garden. And on the lawn, I've seen a lot of really interesting suggestions for people just to use a mulch mower on the lawn, which I know is controversial in a way, because the leaves may contain larvae or moths in there, but you could rake most of them. But if you mulch the leaves into the lawn, it'll reduce the weeds in your lawn for next year.
And also the amount of fertilizer that you need to use.
And fertilizer.
to keep
Yep,
your lawn
absolutely.
beautiful.
The leaves are not garbage.
Yeah, we've been sort of talked into the need to have this pristine, perfectly manicured lawn across the United States. But really, the reality is that most of the wildlife doesn't enjoy your lawn, and so I definitely recommend getting a little patch. So thank you guys so much. So much interesting information expressed during this, and we will, as I said, we have recorded this. We will be sending out a recording of this to everybody who's attended, as well as those who have registered. Thank you once again, and with that, we'll say goodbye. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.